Hello and welcome to Spardha Lines, your one-stop destination for the civil services preparation, UPSC, KPSC and other relevant examinations. Today we have picked up a couple of important articles from the Hindu which are very significant from your UPSC and KPSC examination point of view. Let's get started and look into the first article. As we have discussed in the past, before we start with these articles, we have been taking some of the important MCQs as well. What is that you have to do? Before I give the answer and the explanation, look at the question. What you feel is the right answer, put it on the comment section and then look into the explanation. If you're liking these initiatives, please to like the video, share it with your fellow aspirants and also hit the subscribe button. Let's look into the first question and the first article. Which among the following river drains into the Gulf of Guinea? Galana River, Niger, Tana, Zambezi. The answer to this is Niger River. Why have we taken this practice question? Because this article on the Hindu makes a reference to the Gulf of Guinea, which is why we have taken this practice question. Remember, UPSC in the past has asked questions with respect to the Gulf of Guinea. So it is very important for us to know which are the countries in and around it and where is it present and what is the significance of it. When we look into this particular river, when we look into the rivers that flow and drain into the Gulf of Guinea, what we have is the Niger River. So where is the Niger River? It is at this particular point. So what we have is the Niger River which drains into the Gulf of Guinea. And where is Gulf of Guinea? It happens to be in the Atlantic Ocean. And the other rivers that are given here directly drive into this part of the Indian Ocean. So this is important from your preliminary examination, that what we have is the Indian Ocean. All the other rivers of Galana, Tana and Zambezi drain into the Indian Ocean, but Niger gets into the Atlantic Ocean, which is in the Gulf of Guinea, which is very important from your preliminary examination point of view. What is the economic importance of Gulf of Guinea? It is at this particular point that there is a lot of oil and gas reserves. So countries in and around it would be able to extract the gas as well as oil. Added to it, this region is also known for piracy related activities. What is piracy related activities? This is also mostly seen in and around Somalia as well. What happens in piracy? Let's say for example, there is one of the ships. This particular shipment is carrying goods or it is also carrying, let's say for example, oil or something like that. In that particular case, you would have some of the organizations which come near these shipments, take over these shipments and ultimately take these shipments to their home country, and these are the criminal activities, illegal activities conducted by some of the people in and around the coastal waters. So in order to prevent it, what we have is the second anti-piracy patrol in the Gulf of Guinea that was undertaken by the Indian Navy. So there are many shipments that move along the coastal waters. So there are illegal activities that are conducted by these criminals who take over these shipments. In order to prevent these shipments taken over by the criminals, what we have is anti-piracy patrol that was undertaken by the Indian Navy. So what is the significance of it? The significance is that there is a lot of gas and oil reserve in this particular area. So major exports happen to number of countries. To prevent piracy related activities, what we have is the Indian Navy take up it. And from the preliminary examination point of view, remember what we have is the Niger which happens to enter the Gulf of Guinea. UPSC has asked questions, so which is why we have taken this practice question. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which among the following statements is the best description of amniocentesis? It is a prenatal procedure performed on a pregnant woman to withdraw a small amount of fluid from the sac surrounding the fetus. A procedure which involves cutting open and performing surgery on the muscles, valves or arteries of the heart. It is a diagnostic strategy in patients suspected of having pneumonia, having considerable limitations. A therapy which uses high-powered energy beams such as X-rays or photons to kill cancer cells. Which among the following is the best description of amniocentesis? The answer to this is A. What is amniocentesis? It is a prenatal procedure performed on a pregnant woman. To do what? to withdraw a small amount of fluid from the sac surrounding the fetus. So they will remove one of the liquids or the fluid and ultimately conclude whether it is a male child or a female child. Why have we taken this practice question? Because this article here speaks about illegal abortions. This article here also speaks about sex selection as well, and one of the methods where sex selection is used is called as amniocentesis. So when it comes to sex selection, we have this method that is employed by the doctors to identify whether the fetus, whether the baby happens to be a male or a female. And one such procedure where they make use of is called as the amniocentesis, where the fluid is taken from the sac and they would be able to determine whether it is a male or a female fetus. Ultimately, this will be conveyed to the parents, and this is banned in India according to the laws of the country. So what we have is the prevention of the sex determination, and if any doctor goes on to convey what is the gender of the fetus, in that case they can also be thrown behind bars as well. So sex selection in India is banned in India primarily because of the female feticide that is taking place in India, where the population of the females are also dropping as well. They also go on to abort these female childs in order to have a male progeny or the male generation, and as a result what we have is a depreciation or a drop in numbers of the female members, and that is why we have Prime Minister Narendra Modi who came up with Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao Andolan or a program. So this happens to be important from your preliminary examination point of view. Now let's look into the mains article, which is very important from your GS paper 2 polity. The article here is speaking about the state funded elections. So the first important concept that we have to understand is what is the state funded elections. When we speak about the state funded elections, as the very name denotes, state here does not mean that it is the state of Karnataka or the state of Maharashtra. State here stands for the country, or in the political norma it also stands for the nation, and it ultimately means it is the government. When we say state, there are three different organs of the state, but when we say state in this particular case, what are we deciding on? We are focusing on the money that needs to be spent by the state exchequer. So when we say state funded elections, it basically means that a certain amount of money that is coming into the state coffer, the same will be used, and ultimately it will be used for the conduction of the elections. As of now, for the conduct of the elections, yes, the state is spending for the security. Then what do we mean by state funded elections? It basically means that, let's say I am a candidate who is contesting for one of the constituencies. What do I do right now? I make use of my own money. I am given a particular threshold or a benchmark, so I should be able to use my own money to contest in my constituency and ultimately win the elections. So I am spending about 50 lakhs, 60 lakhs, 75 lakhs, whatsoever is the prescribed threshold. I would be able to use my own money and ultimately contest in the elections. When I say state funded elections, what does it mean? It means that currently I am spending the money, but in the near future the state will be providing this money. I don't have to spend any money whatsoever for my personal expenses. So what are these personal expenses? I have to issue pamphlets, I have to travel to the entire constituency, I have to go meet the people as well, I have to tell them what my agenda is, what are the welfare schemes and programs that I would be giving to them, how am I going to be transparent to them. To do all these activities, what we require is certain amount of money that a candidate has to spend. In this particular case, instead of the candidate spending the entire money, there would be a state corpus, which means a certain amount of money which be declared only for the elections, and this money would be flowing from this particular funds and going to the candidates who will be contesting. So state funded election basically means, apart from the elections which the government generally spends, the state generally spends, which is for the conduction of the elections, which is for the security and for the tools and the mechanisms which is already being spent. If a candidate has to spend, this is with respect to the candidate, mind you, not with respect to the general elections, where you will have the election commission making sure that there is security measures, and then you will also have is people who will be employed. We're not speaking about that. We are speaking about individual candidates whose money will be spent by the state. So in this particular case, we have the state which will be contributing for the success of that particular candidate if he is from a political party. Now, what the state funded elections will basically do is a certain amount of money will be given to a candidate and the candidate would be able to spend instead of using his personal money. So, when it comes to the state funded elections, there are two types in it. One is what is called as direct, the other is what is called as indirect state funding of elections. What do I mean by direct state elections? That is, when a candidate is contesting, let's say for example, he requires about 75 lakhs for contesting that particular constituency. This entire 75 lakhs would be given by the state. That is what is called as direct state funding. So, if I require 50 lakhs for the expenses for that particular constituency, the state will be providing this 50 lakhs directly to me and it will give it up to me so that I can spend on my own. So, I would be able to decide where I am going to diversify this entire 50 lakhs or the 75 lakhs that is given to me. So, the state is giving me this money and I am spending it in my constituency for different kinds of electioneering campaign. This is what is direct elections, where the entire money would be given to me. What is this indirect state funding? In indirect state funding, money would not be given to me, but it will be of kind. What do I mean by kind? Let's say for example, I have to travel my entire constituency. I would be given the petrol expenses, or I would be given certain kind of subsidies as well, or I would be given an office space in that particular constituency at a cheaper price. So, money would not be given to me, but certain kinds of subsidies and other free time on the public broadcaster would be given to me so that I would be able to make an appeal to the people in my constituency. Direct is where I would be given the money, but in indirect it is not the money but it is of the kind. What are the different kinds of indirect state funding that can happen? Free time on the public broadcaster. Let's say for example on the DD Doordarshan, I would be given a specific period of time where I would be able to speak to my voters as well as the people in my constituency. I would be given security from the government, from the department, and I would be provided office space as well as utility subsidies, and it is also provided exempted from paying income tax. Let's say for example, as of now you do have the political parties which are exempt from paying income tax under section 13A of the Income Tax Act. So such is the kind, which means that I am not directly provided the money, but instead I am provided some other kinds of means and mechanisms as to how I would be able to operate. So this is the difference between direct and the indirect state funding of the elections. Now, previously there were a number of committees and commissions that were appointed. These commissions were asked a question: should we go ahead and implement state funding of the elections? So, committees were appointed, they looked into this entire scenario, they understood what is the root cause problem, and they also came up with the recommendation as well. There were 4 committees that were appointed. One happens to be the Indrajit Gupta Committee on State Funding of Elections 1998, Law Commission Report on Reforms of Electoral Rolls 1999, National Commission to Review the Working of the Constitution 2001, and the Second Administrative Reforms Commission 2008. So 4 commissions were appointed. Everyone looked into it. 3 commissions, that is 1998 Commission, 1999 Commission and 2008 Commission said what we can have is partial state funding. So these commissions said that we can have partial state funding, but the National Commission to Review the Working of the Constitution said no, we are not going to enter into the state mode of funding. We are not going to enter into it. So what did Indrajit Gupta Committee on State Funding of Elections said? They said that when it comes to elections, what we will have is state funded elections partially and not fully. What do I mean by partial? I am not going to give the cash as discussed under the direct elections, but instead we can do it in the form of a kind, which means a certain amount of free public broadcasting or a certain kind of subsidies can be given to them. These are the kind that can be employed by the Election Commission in kind only. So if the recommendation of the Indrajit Gupta Committee on State Funding of Elections basically did that it will be only in kind and not in terms of direct funding to the political party or the candidate. The other commissions, that is the Law Commission Report on the Reform of Electoral Laws in 1999 and the Second Administrative Reforms Commission which was appointed in 2008, basically went on to say that even before we come up with such a mechanism which is of kind or partial way, then what we need to already have is a strong regulatory framework. If we have this regulatory framework, how this particular program has to run, who has to appoint the person, who will be appointing this person, there is a person who will be giving the money to the people who will be contesting elections, and this person should also be appointed by someone to monitor, right? So there should be a committee. Let's say for example, if we are appointing the Chief Information Commissioner, what we will have is the Prime Minister, then what we will have is the opposition party leader, and one of the ministers will be appointed by the Prime Minister. So there is a committee. Similarly, if there is a person who is monitoring it, there has to be a committee which will be appointed. This committee will appoint a person to look into it, and then this person will start dispersing the money as well, or will it be the Election Commission of India? So we have to have a clear-cut plan even before we have to come up with such an idea, said the Second Administrative Reforms Commission as well as the Law Commission. However, the National Commission to Review the Working of the Constitution clearly said no to this particular procedure. Now what we have to look at is arguments which says that yes, we can look into this state funding, and arguments which say no to the state funding. First, we will look at arguments which say no to the state funding. What are these arguments? We should not have state funding when it comes to the elections as well as political parties as well as individuals. Why? That is because we already have a lot of deficit. What do I mean by deficit? We have the fiscal deficit, we already have the revenue deficit, we are already seeking a lot of credit from the market, and as a result, while we have deficit, if we continue to also give it to the candidates as well as the political parties, the deficit will increase as well, and when the deficit increases, we would not be able to spend for other welfare schemes and the programs as well. And what is the guarantee that I am spending today for the candidates as well as the political party? What is the guarantee that they will not be corrupt in the near future? So the idea of introducing this entire exercise is to make sure that the corruption is out of the system. Even if the state is spending for the political candidates, what is the guarantee that these candidates will not become corrupt in the near future? So there is no guarantee. You cannot inculcate morals into the people, you cannot throw values into the people. It has to be self-attained, it has to be self-modified, it has to be self-attained in such a manner that they should not be corrupt. So when such a process cannot be inculcated into the person, what is the use of coming up with the state funded elections to this section of the people who are already spending a lot when it comes to electioneering? Even if there is a threshold that has been set at 75 lakhs, 50 lakhs, whatsoever that is, still candidates go on to spend huge amounts of money. So if the state is spending about 50 lakhs per candidate or to the political party in a constituency, that is not at all enough. So there can be a problem in the near future. So there will be a deficit, and as a result, state funding should not happen. And when we look into the primary healthcare system, we are not spending health on the healthcare system. We do not have the education as well. That is, we are not spending enough on the education. We are not spending enough on the welfare. So we have to focus on these areas instead of spending on the political parties and the political candidates. And if at all such an issue does come up and the government does accept and the Election Commission of India does give a recommendation, let's say hypothetically they do accept such a recommendation, every second outfit will get into the political arena. So this is where the problem is. So because it is a state that is funding, as of now I have to fund my own a political campaign. If it is the state that is funding, every Tom, Dick and Harry will start coming into the political arena and they will start standing for the election as well. So every political party, whether it is okay to give it for the recognized political party, but you will have group of political parties who will come up and request the state to give the money so that they can contest the elections. This ultimately will have a hit on the state exchequer. That is the problem. So what is that we have to do? When looking at all these arguments, we can say that state exchequer's money cannot be used for the public elections for the candidates as well as the political party. This is one side of the argument. The other side is, what if this is actually brought into the picture? If this is actually brought into the picture, the amount of corruption can also reduce. There will be few people who will not be corrupted. These people will be enticed to move towards non-corruption phase, and as a result, what we will have is the clean politics. This is just for the sake of argument, but then clean politics will never happen as long as people's wish and the candidate who is contesting would want to remain clean. So this is for the sake of argument that it will create clean politics, which may not happen. It is just a utopian concept that I am just discussing. So basically, if at all there is a need for coming up with such a state funding of the elections, what should be done? Parties recognized as national and state parties can only be given it. It is not for all candidates as well as the political parties. If it is recognized as a national political party or the state political party as per the criterion that is described, only then such political parties may be given. In case we do come into a consensus that such a concept should be enabled, in that case only the party which is recognized at the national level and the state level can be provided such state funding. Second, an annual contribution should be defined. Let's say for example, we also have the contingency fund when it comes to the constitution. So a certain amount of money is safeguarded for the contingency fund. Similarly, for the state funded elections, a certain amount of money can be defined. For example, 500 crores or for example, whatsoever the money is. From this corpus, only for the recognized and the national political parties, the money can be dispersed. In the United States, there is a rule that the presidential candidate raises X amount of money, they are eligible to receive an equal amount of money from the government. Let's say for example, if the candidate is raising about 50 lakhs, the same equivalent amount will be provided by the state exchequer. But what is the catch here? If it is equivalent amount that is being given by the state, then there is a lot of transparency rules and guidelines that has to be followed. If these rules can be followed, then ultimately the money can be dispersed. But most in the United States of America do not take up this particular fund because there are a lot of rules and regulations with respect to the transparency. If such transparency rules and guidelines can be brought about in India, then we would be able to enable this entire exercise. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says branded generic and the missing ingredient of quality. So the article here is speaking about the branded medicines, it is speaking about the generic medicines, it is also speaking about the missing ingredient of the quality. First, we have to understand one of the concept called as the over-the-counter sales. What is this concept of over-the-counter sales? When we speak about over the counter, what exactly happens? Let's say you go to a doctor. What would the doctor do? He would give you a prescription which would clearly say that if you are suffering from so and so disease, that so and so tablet should be given. So they will give you a prescription, and after you give the prescription, you would go to the pharmacist and give this prescription, and he will give you the medicines that is required. It can be the tablet, the syrups, whatsoever it is. But what happens in the over the counter sale? In the over the counter sale, there is no prescription per se. You would directly go to that particular person. That person, you would have a bonhomie that you would have generated over a period of time, and as a result you would ask that person, I'm suffering from fever, I'm suffering from cold, please give me a tablet. So without prescription, if there is a pharmacist who gives you a, let's say, tablet or a syrup without any prescription, that is what is called as over the counter. So this article primarily goes on to say that we have doctors who give the medicines, that is they give the prescription and you ultimately go about availing these medicines. So what happens in this particular case? They give some of the medicines which might be branded. What do I mean by branded? These are the medicines which are from a particular company. Let's say we have a private company. This particular private company would have come up with a medicine or a syrup or with a tablet. So this branded syrup or the tablet might be costly as well, but then their quality might be tested. So ultimately it is for the doctor to decide whether that particular medicine is good or not. If it is good, then he also looks into the quality of it. It might have worked for a couple of patients as well, and ultimately he might have a perception or a viewpoint that this medicine quality is very good, and as a result he would be prescribing that particular medicine to that particular patient. So what is the doctor looking at? The doctor is looking at the brand as well as quality, but yes, cost is a hit factor, which means that this person may have to shell out extra component or extra money primarily because it is costing him more. So whenever a doctor is prescribing a medicine, it is more about the quality that a doctor looks into and the brand, but may not cater to the cost, and as a result it is a hit to that particular person. And as a result, we had the medical council which had recently said that because it is hitting on the cost factor, most of the branded medicines that we have will also have the generic version of it. What is this generic version? This generic version basically means it is a one of the medicines or a syrup, or it can be a tablet which is cheaper in nature. So there is a original medicine. This original medicine, similar components are also made of in the other tablet as well. So you have the original medicine, you also have is a generic copy. What do I mean by generic copy? This original medicines, similar components are taken in the medicines, reverse engineering is conducted, and a cheaper copy of this original medicine is released into the market. So generic basically means it is a cheaper one rather than the branded one. Similar components are used in the generic ones, and it also gives the same relief as well. But when it comes to the prescription, number of doctors may not prescribe it because according to their perception and the viewpoint, the quality of this particular generic medicine may not be as good as the branded ones. So what is the author trying here? The author is trying to say, when we actually go about buying the medicine, we say that this particular medicine is good or not. Ideally, the doctor would have given the prescription. We do not trust the doctors in most of the cases. We go to this pharmacist and ultimately seek their consultation whether this particular medicine is right or not, and he sometimes prescribes some other medicine, a cheaper alternative to the existing medicine. This is not right, says the author. Whatever the author says is that when the doctor is prescribed a certain medicine, yes, it might be branded, it might be costly, but at the same time he might also look into whether the quality of the medicine is good or not. But then yes, there are few doctors who might not give the generic medicines despite the quality of it not being good equivalent to that of the branded medicines, but in such cases they are the exceptions. In such cases an alternative can be looked into, says the author. So the author goes on to say that wherever branded medicines are required, branded medicines have to be given, but in case there is suitable alternative for the branded, which is in the form of a generic medicine, generic medicine should be supported. So we have the medical council which said for all the branded we already have the generic versions. The generic version medicine should be prescribed to the patients. In such a case, if we are able to meet the quality of it, then it can be prescribed, says the author. This is where he brings into picture a couple of arguments. He says that when it comes to the present situation, it is the pharmacist, it is the salesperson who decide which brand of generic medicine is good or not. That should not be the way forward. The doctor should decide it. Doctor has no freedom to mention his favorite brand. This should not be the way. It depends on whether the quality is good or not. If the doctor has prescribed a quality which is good in a branded, the patient should be taking it up. He should not be discussing with the pharmacist. Yes, he has the right to discuss, but then if we are going by the pharmacist prescription, that may not be right, says the author. And we also have the National Medical Council which has directed all doctors to prescribe only generic names and not brand names. This may not serve the purpose all the time, because if the same quantity is not being supported by the generic medicines, then there is no use of prescribing a generic version, says the author. And apart from that, when we speak about the generic medicines, they are generally cheaper, they are not cost effective. In 1975, there was one of the committee called as Hathi Committee. It also recommended that in the near future, all the branded medicines that we have should be completely taken off, and what we should have is only generic medicines, because these are cheaper. And then you also have the pharmaceutical companies and doctors. They enter into a consensus and they basically start providing only the branded branded medicines. This happens to be an unethical marketing. This should also be controlled at the same time, and doctors' reputation on successful treatment depends upon the reliability of the quantity and the quality of the active pharmaceutical ingredient. Added to it, the author also takes into picture the importance of the quality of the medicine. The prevalence rate of spurious and not standard quality medicines stand at 4.5% and 3.4% respectively, as shown by two national drug surveys in the last 10 years using thousands of samples from retail chemists across India. What do they say? That the quality is not matching the actual intended standards. That is where the author goes on to say that if they are not able to meet the intended standards established by the government, their license should be immediately cancelled, and such manufacturers should be thrown behind bars as well. So an alternative or an adaptation that we can look at is from the state of Tamil Nadu, where the Tamil Nadu Medical Services Corporation Limited's practice, where all supplied medicines are kept under quarantine stock till double-blinded samples are cleared in quality testing by government and the private sector laboratories. Only when we have twice the sampling that is done, only when it is proved that it is actually good for the people when they consume it and does not have side effects, that is when it has to be given to the people and not otherwise. Without such a reliable assurance from the government, it does not have the moral duty or the right to enforce prescription only for the generic name. So only when the generic name can be used or can be prescribed when it is meeting the intended standards and the quality. That apart, what should the government do? It should provide free medicines and free diagnostics which are acceptable for the government, and it should also open the network of Janaushadhi Kendras which has to be expanded, and the profit margin can be limited to 15% for the wholesalers, and for the retailers can be 35% and less than that, so that people are able to afford these medicines as well. These are the other steps that the author says that the government should enable, so that what we have is healthy practices for the healthy environment in India with respect to the medicines. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about sub-categorization within states. What is this concept of sub-categorization? When we speak about sub-categorization, what happens? Let's say for example, we have the OBCs, or let's say for example, we have the SC/ST community. What is the present status? When we look at the present status, the SC/ST community has one single categorization. So there are number of castes within the scheduled caste. When I say scheduled caste, it is not just one caste. There are number of castes. It can be 10, 20, 30, 40 whatsoever. So there are different castes which are added into a schedule. So now let's say if I am applying for one of the government jobs, or I am going to one of the educational institutions, irrespective of the caste that I belong to within the scheduled caste, all are treated equally. What would happen in this particular case? In this case, let's say for example, within the SC or within the ST, there might be few castes which would have already got empowered. They are socially backward, yes, and at the same time, they might be economically prosperous within the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribe. These people, because they are economically prosperous, they have had an advanced level of economic prosperity. It is only this particular caste within the scheduled tribe and the scheduled caste who are able to reap the benefits of it. So within the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes, there might be poor sections who have abysmal conditions, who are not empowered over a period of time. So the higher upper level within the SC or the SC/ST community are deriving all benefits from it, but the lower ranks, the poor sections within the SC/ST are not able to reap the benefits. Why? Because everyone are clubbed under one single categorization. So what do we mean by one single categorization? Irrespective of the caste that they belong to within the scheduled caste, all are treated as one single community. This is not good. Why? Because there are some groups within the SC and the ST, some caste, which are not able to reap the benefits of it. There might be a cream within this particular community. They are taking away all the profits. So in order to ensure that the poorest in the SC or the ST are also able to reap the benefits, what we can come up with is called as the sub-categorization. What is the sub-categorization? Basically, let's say for example, we have caste A, we have caste B or caste C. So within SC, we have these three castes. So these castes, let's say for example, there is a caste A which has already had advanced level of economic prosperity. So what am I going to do? Within the SC, I'm going to say that 15% will be reserved for the A community. Then what we have is the B community. The B community, let's say for example, have less economic prosperity in comparison to A. So I'm going to say that 35% will be reserved for this B category, and the C category has performed abysmally. They're not able to derive any of the economic prosperity because A and B are be taking away all the advantages. So what am I going to do? I'm going to say that 50% will be reserved for the community which is the scheduled caste, that caste within the scheduled caste category where 50% will be reserved for them, which is what is called as sub-categorization. So in sub-categorization, again what we will be enabling a certain percentage of reservation on the basis of the caste that they belong to, which is called as the sub-categorization. Why are we discussing about sub-categorization? That is because when it comes to the SC/ST, who will be able to decide whether a person belongs to the SC or the ST? It is the parliament. But when it comes to the OBC criterion, remember, the state governments have the power to decide who is the OBC, other backward classes, so on and so forth. But when it comes to the SC and the ST community, recommendation can be made by the states, but ultimately it is the parliament which will decide, and the president who will make the ultimate notification. So who will decide whether it is SC or ST? It happens to be the parliament. Back in the year 2004, there was one of the recommendation that was given by the Andhra Pradesh in 1996. I'm sorry, So where the Andhra Pradesh government in 1996 formed a one-man commission of Justice Ramachandra Raju, which recommended sub-categorization of SCs in the state based on the evidence that some communities were more backward and had less representation. So this was a recommendation given by the Justice Ramachandra Raju. But then the Supreme Court looked into this entire issue and it said that when it comes to such a recommendation, it cannot be taken up by the state. Why it cannot be taken up by the state? Because this is a constitutional matter which can only be decided by the parliament. Parliament has the power to decide whether sub-categorization has to be taken up within that particular SC or the SC/ST fold, and the state does not have any power, said the Supreme Court of India back in the year 2004, where it held state did not have the power to unilaterally sub-categorize committees. Why cannot it sub-categorize? Because this is the power that is given to the parliament. Only parliament would be able to do so, and a final notification can be issued by the president. So who has the power? It is the parliament and not the state legislature. The state does not have the power, said the Supreme Court of India in 2004, because the state government of Andhra Pradesh came up with the sub-categorization. So what was the viewpoint of the Supreme Court? It said sub-categorization, if it can be initiated, can only be initiated by the parliament and not by the state government. But in Punjab, something else happened. A 5-judge bench headed by Justice Arun Mishra held in 2020 judgment that deciding on the quantum of the benefits in the list of SC/STs already notified would not amount to tinkering with it, and the states could do it. What did the Supreme Court say? It came up with a new interpretation. While we are not going to discuss about what the Supreme Court said was that we have the SC/ST committee. Who will be belonging to the SC or the ST community is already decided by the parliament. So the parliament has decided that this community, this caste belongs to the scheduled caste, this caste belongs to the scheduled caste. So it is already decided. While the parliament has already decided who belongs to the SC or the ST, sub-categorizing them is not a problem for the states. So there is a conflicting opinion. In order to make sure that this conflicting opinion is overtaken, what we require is a higher bench which will ultimately decide whether it is the state which can do the sub-categorization or it has to be done only by the parliament. So there will be a new bench that should be appointed, and this has to be clarified, says this article. In the past, we've had the Attorney General of India who has said that could be allowed only if there is impeachable evidence to indicate a necessity. So this sub-categorization can be allowed for a state only if evidence can be given. Sub-categorization can be done if evidence is provided, and for which constitutional amendment should be brought in, said the Attorney General of India. However, when it comes to the National Commission for Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes, they have said constitutional amendment is not required. Why? Because Article 16 of 4 already says that the states would be able to create special laws. Since it is already explicitly made a mention in 16, why come up with the law? So the legal experts have now pointed out the necessity to have concrete data to support categorization. Parliament would be able to do anything. So the Supreme Court has to decide right now whether the constitutional amendment is required or not. Sub-categorization can be taken up by the state governments or not. Parliament, yes, they would be able to do so, but whether the states can do it or not should be ultimately decided by the Supreme Court, is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about chikungunya. So from the preliminary examination point of view, remember there is an important manufacturer called as Valneva. They have come up with one of the medicines called as Ischik. They have approved for the administration of those people who are above 18 years or old where chikungunya can be impacted. So they have come up with a medicine where if a person is impacted with chikungunya, this person is administered with Ischik, and ultimately the person will overcome this entire issue. Chikungunya is characterized by severe joint pain and impaired mobility and comes with fever. It is a viral infection transmitted primarily by the mosquitoes and has been described as an emerging global health threat as well. Where is it prevalent? It is seen in Africa, Asia and Americas, but sporadic outbreaks have also been reported in other regions as well. What are the symptoms? There is joint pain, then there are symptoms like joint swelling, muscle pain, headache, nausea, fatigue, rash, so on and so forth. And in order to address it, what we have is this particular medicine or the vaccine that is given. So Ischik is administered as a single dose by injection into the muscle. It contains a live weakened version of chikungunya virus and may cause symptoms in the vaccine recipient similar to those experienced by the people. Its safety was evaluated in 2 clinical trials conducted in North Africa, in which 3,500 participants 18 years of age and older received a dose of the vaccine, with others studying including participants with the placebo. Since it has worked effectively, what we have is this vaccine X-Chick, which is being administered to the people in order to control chikungunya. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says challenges to the electoral bond scheme. We still have more articles that will be coming up with the discussion that is surfacing in the Supreme Court. Once we have the judgment that is passed by the Supreme Court, we will take this analysis in a broader level. So this article we will not be discussing right now, but once we have the concurrent decision made by the Supreme Court of India, we will release an explicit video for the same, where we will discuss entire analysis for the electoral bond scheme. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.